What separates us from all other species is the ratio of our frontal lobe to the rest of the brain. The frontal lobe is an area of the brain that's responsible for firm intention, for decision making, for regulating behavior, for inspiration. It is the seat of what causes us to take information from our environment and process it and store it in our brain to make decisions or choices that are different than the decisions and choices that we've made in the past. The brain is made up of tiny nerve cells called neurons. These neurons have tiny branches that reach out and connect to other neurons to form a neural net. Each place where they connect is integrated into a thought or a memory. Now, the brain builds up all its concepts by the law of associative memory. For example, ideas, thoughts, and feelings are all constructed and interconnected in this neural net, and all have a possible relationship with one another. The concept and the feeling of love, for instance, is stored in this vast neural net. But we build the concept of love from many other different ideas. Some people have love connected to disappointment. When they think about love, they experience the memory of pain, sorrow, anger, and even rage. Rage may be linked to hurt, which may be linked to a specific person, which then is connected back to love. The brain does not know the difference between what it sees in its environment and what it remembers, because the same specific neural nets are then firing. We know physiologically that nerve cells that fire together wire together. If you practice something over and over again, those nerve cells have a long-term relationship. If you get angry on a daily basis, if you get frustrated on a daily basis, if you suffer on a daily basis, if you give reasons for the victimization in your life, you're rewiring and reintegrating that neural net on a daily basis, and that neural net now has a long-term relationship with all those other nerve cells called an identity. We also know that nerve cells that don't fire together no longer wire together. They lose their long-term relationship because every time we interrupt the thought process that produces a chemical response in the body, every time we interrupt it, those nerve cells that are connected to each other start breaking the long-term relationship. If we practice our mental rehearsal and our skill in being able to do it, will show that certain brain circuits will grow as a result of our effort. It'll get easier to do, in other words. There's a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is like a little mini factory, and it is a place that assembles certain chemicals that matches certain emotions that we experience. Those particular chemicals are called peptides. They're small chain amino acid sequences. The body's basically a carbon unit that makes about 20 different amino acids all together to formulate its physical structure. In the hypothalamus, we take small chain proteins called peptides, and we assemble them into certain neuropeptides or neurohormones that match the emotional states that we experience on a daily basis. So there's chemicals for anger, and there's chemicals for sadness, and there's chemicals for victimization. There's chemicals for lust. There's a chemical that matches every emotional state that we experience. And the moment that we experience that emotional state in our body or in our brain, that hypothalamus will immediately assemble the peptide that then releases it through the pituitary into the bloodstream. The moment it makes it into the bloodstream, it finds its way to different centers or different parts of the body. Now, every single cell in the body has these receptors on the outside.
And one cell can have thousands of receptors studding its surface, kind of opening up to the outside world. And when a peptide docks on a cell, it literally, like a key going into a lock, sits on the receptor surface and attaches to it and kind of moves the receptor, and kind of like a doorbell buzzing. A receptor that has a peptide sitting in it sets off a whole cascade of biochemical events, some of which changes the nucleus of the cell. Each cell is definitely alive, and each cell has a consciousness, particularly if we define consciousness as the point of view of an observer. There is always the perspective of the cell. The cell knows where it is, the cell knows where it's going, the cell knows what proteins it's making, the cell knows whether it's about to divide or whether it's in a program to stop dividing. In fact, the cell is the smallest unit of consciousness in the body.
I'm hungry.
The cells are yelling up to the brain saying, "We haven't gotten our fix today." And it's going to start sending impressions to the brain, and the brain is going to start to formulate imagery. It's going to sound like voices in our head. To think of a reason why we should be depressed. Think of a reason why we should be confused. Think of a reason for our own suffering. And the body is going to be telling the brain that it's not getting its chemical needs met. And so the brain will then activate and start going to our past situations and flashing pictures to our frontal lobe.
Oh, yeah! We've commandeered an entire serving plant! Yeah, keep it coming, keep it coming! Oh, yeah!
Well, my definition of an addiction is something really simple. Something that you can't stop. We bring to ourselves situations that will fulfill the biochemical craving of the cells of our body by creating situations that meet our chemical needs.
It always happens to me. Why?
So my definition really means that if you can't control your emotional state, you must be addicted to it.
Oh, this ruins everything.
The people that we really love are people who are willing to share our emotional needs, our feelings, whatever they are. Whether they are sexual, whether they are victimized, poor me, poor you, whether they are power, you need somebody to control you so you feel like you're in control.
No, ma'am, don't dip your half-eaten shrimp back into the cocktail sauce.
Screw you and your health codes. I am the bride's sister. I'll stick my ass in the cocktail sauce if I damn well please.
Airport, come on. I want you to get out there and serve, make sure everybody has a full glass. Fun, fun, fun. Williams, you won't do anything about it.
Me show you what women want!
What is reality?
What is reality?
What is reality?
How do we know
real
those
reality?
They have taken laboratory animals and they've hooked up electrodes in certain parts of their brain that produce those neuropeptides. And those neuropeptides are such strong chemicals that, given the fact that they train the laboratory animal to press a lever to get that chemical release, that neuropeptide release, it would choose the neuropeptide release more than hunger, more than sex, more than thirst, more than sleep. As a matter of fact, it went to the point of physical exhaustion and collapsed before it would take care of itself physically. And that's really what stress does to our body. We become so addicted to the stress in our lives that we can't quit our job, even though it doesn't serve us. We can't leave our relationship because it doesn't serve us. We can't make choices because the stimulus and the responses produce the chemistry that clouds our choices, and we're no different than the dog who lacks its ability to make choices because of its smaller frontal lobe.
So how can anyone really say they're in love with a specific person, for example? They're only in love with the anticipation of the emotions they're addicted to. Because the same person could fall out of favor the next week by not complying.
But it all starts in the cell. And who gives the cells the order? The orders come from the neural net in our brain, which are based on the experiences and information that we've logged in there. And we use a certain box of solutions to our life that causes chemistry to take place. So in order for us to change the chemistry, we would literally have to change the neural net, which means we'd have to change our identity, which means we'd have to change our attitude, or change the way in which we interact with our environment. And every time we keep being the same person and keep experiencing the same attitudes, all we're doing is reinforcing ourselves as our identity.
I once did a little gig in a woman's prison they're all heroin addicts, and by teaching them that they have receptors for the heroin, and that the more heroin that they take, their ability to make their own internal endorphins, their own internal heroin, basically starts to decline. And then the receptors start to become subsensitive, or there's actually less of them. So there's these actual changes, and then this new information about how less brain cells are being made, so that people get kind of In all addictions, they get stuck in old patterns.
If we're bombarding the cell with the same attitude and the same chemistry over and over again on a daily basis, when that cell finally decides to divide, when it produces a sister cell or a daughter cell, that next cell will have more receptor sites for those particular emotional neuropeptides and less receptor sites for vitamins, minerals, nutrients, fluid exchange, or even the release of waste products or toxins. Now, all aging is a result of improper protein production. What happens when we age? Our skin loses elasticity. Well, elastin is a protein. What happens to our enzymes? We don't digest as well. What happens to our synovial fluid? Those are proteins. They become brittle and stiff. What happens to our bones? They become thin. So all aging is a result of improper protein production. So then the question arises, does it really matter what we eat? And does nutrition really have an effect if the cell doesn't even have the receptor sites after 20 years of emotional abuse to even receive or let in the nutrients that are necessary for its health? Everybody secretly is an adventurer. Everybody loves the adventure. It's just taking that first step. And once they have the moment of insight, that moment of insight carries frequency. It carries a message. The cells of the body are enlivened by possibility. They're enlivened by unknown potentials. They're enlivened by a future history or future opportunity that may be down the rabbit hole a little further. And if they allow themselves to experience the quandary and the mysticism and the possibility that when they emerge from the rabbit hole, they're a different person. And now they go back into their world. And because they've processed that information and left footprints in the mind and in the brain, their perception of the world will never be the same. We're in completely new territory in our brain. And because we're in completely new territory, we're rewiring the brain, literally reconnecting to a new concept. Then ultimately, it changes us from the inside out. If I change my mind, will I change my choices? If I change my choices, will my life change? Why can't I change? What am I addicted to? What will I lose that I'm chemically attached to? And what person, place, thing, time, or event that I'm chemically attached to that I don't want to lose because I may have to experience the chemical withdrawal from that? Hence the human drama.
This life is but a page in an enormous book in which we will always be who we are, but always with the inherent needling of ambitious pursuit, a pursuit that takes us from the boring tedium of self-reflection, of self-hate, and to self-creation of new dreams.
So you can't ask them their opinion, because you know what they're going to tell you. You're starting to act different. I liked you better the other way. And that's a great sign that you're making a change.
Tell you a little about myself. Oh, the light is blinking already. See, this is what happens whenever I speak. Weird, weird things happen. Okay. All right, well, look, when I hold it, it stays on. What does that mean? All right. Oh, that's okay. Maybe God wants me to meet you. Hi.
Here we are actually filming great thinkers. Everyone in this room is a great thinker. Now that we got them thinking, that's always a trick, isn't it?